The Ember
You're
room
not
Jackson
going
Harrove had
anywhere.
eaten at
Let
tables
go
where the
of me.
cutlery cost
Now.
more than most
Not
people's
until
rent.
you listen.
He had sat
She
across from
said let
senators,
go.
cartel intermediaries, and a federal judge who smiled too easily. He had been the most dangerous person in every room he'd ever entered. None of that prepared him for the Tuesday night. He walked into the Ember room on 125th Street in Harlem with a cracked leather jacket, $43 in his pocket, and the quiet, humiliating need to find out whether he was worth anything without his name. It had started, as most of Jackson's crises did, with Pierce. Pierce Caldwell, razor-thin, perpetually unhappy, Jackson's right hand for 11 years, had delivered his verdict while the armored Escalade idled outside the Four Seasons. Jackson needed a wife. The Caruso family was watching. The Underwood girl was still available. Image was currency in this business, and Jackson's image had been running a deficit for 3 years. Jackson didn't look up from his phone. 3 years since Yara, the attorney he had trusted completely. The woman who sat across from him in Positano and said she saw the man behind the empire. 3 weeks later, he found the recording device taped beneath the restaurant table and the federal handler she'd been feeding for 9 months. Since then, he had sealed himself inside his money like a man in a room with no windows. Safe. Airless. Slowly dying. I said no. Rain streaked the glass. Manhattan blurred. And something that had been building in Jackson for months finally broke the surface. Not a plan exactly. More like an instinct. Raw and embarrassing and impossible to ignore. He was going to find out what he was worth without the name. Not Jackson Harrove, the man who made restaurant managers sweat and judges answer on the first ring. Just a man. Broke. Ordinary. Invisible. If no one could love that man, he needed to know. The not knowing was eating him alive. It took him 3 weeks to build the identity. His name would be Dax Monroe. 34. Day labor. He bought clothes from a thrift store on Jerome Avenue. Jeans that fit slightly wrong, a flannel with a loose button, boots with a heel worn down on one side. He stopped cutting his hair. He locked his Patek Philippe in a safe deposit box and bought a Timex at a bodega for $12. He found a studio in the Bronx through a shell LLC and stripped it of everything that cost more than what a man making $14 an hour could afford. Pierce stood in the doorway of the studio staring at the water-stained ceiling and said, with all the delicacy he possessed, "This is clinically insane." Jackson sat on the mattress, lacing up his boots. For the first time in years, something in his face looked almost alive. 3 months. No contact unless the building is on fire. No one sees the help. He got a job washing dishes at a diner on Fordham Road. He took the train. He carried his lunch in a paper bag. And he began to learn what it felt like to be no one. The bus driver looked through him. People on the sidewalk didn't adjust their stride when he walked toward them, because adjusting your stride means acknowledging someone is there. Dax Monroe was not the kind of person anyone needed to acknowledge. He'd been living the identity 2 weeks when a dishwasher named Hector mentioned the Ember room. Jazz on Tuesdays. Best oxtail in the borough. Jackson went that Tuesday, not for the jazz or the oxtail, but because he was testing the second half of his experiment, and the place sounded real in a way the rest of his temporary life did not. The Ember room smelled like wood smoke and garlic and the sweetness of a bar that had been open long enough to absorb. A different glass, poured something amber and smoky, and set it in front of him. "On me," she said. "Since you're clearly not ordering it yourself." She walked away before he could respond. He tasted it. It was, without question, the best whiskey he had ever had. And he had once paid $4,000 for a bottle of Macallan. He came back the following Tuesday. Then Thursdays. Then occasional Saturdays when the live band played, and Amara worked doubles that left her, by midnight, with the exhaustion that lives not in the body but in the face, the tired of smiling tired, the tired you carry when warmth is your job regardless of what the room gives back. He always sat at the bar. Always ordered the cheap beer first. She always, eventually, poured him something better. They talked the way people talk when one of them is supposed to be working, in short bursts between her tables, sentences left open and picked back up 20 minutes later like they'd never been interrupted. His name was Dax. Day laborer, currently between contracts. Her name was Amara. Atlanta. Georgia State, Hospitality Management. She said dryly, making excellent use of her degree. The catering business came up on his fourth Tuesday. She mentioned it the way people mention plans they've stopped fully believing in, briefly, with the preemptive armor of someone who has heard too many reasons why it won't work. I'm building something, she said, refilling the ice bin between tables. Asterisk catering. Private events. Elevated Southern food. The real kind. Asterisk how long? 2 years. What's the holdup? She stopped moving for a moment. It was a real question. Not the sympathetic murmurs she usually got. Asterisk money. Licensing. Commercial kitchen time costs more per hour than I make in a shift. Asterisk, she shrugged. Asterisk, I have a plan. It just requires patience I'm still developing. Asterisk, what's the name? She looked at him. Calloway's Table. That's a good name, I know, she said. And she smiled, not the working smile, but something smaller and more private. The smile of a person being recognized rather than served. He was in trouble and he knew it. He brought her things. Small things. A jar of hot honey from the 116th Street Market.
Amber hot honey?
She'd mentioned in passing
it looks
that
amazing.
she put it
May
on
I?
everything. A paperback chef's memoir she'd referenced once, weeks earlier, found in a used bookstore on Amsterdam for $4. She held the book for a moment before setting it behind the bar. You remembered that. You said the library had a waitlist. You're strange, Dax. I'm just paying attention. That's exactly what I mean. She told him about growing up in Atlanta where her mother cooked every Sunday like a ceremony. About learning to cook at 8, to wait tables at 16, to carry herself like a closed door at 22 when the world started treating pretty black women and hospitality like things it considered available. She had learned to be warm without being open, to reserve her real self for people who had earned it. He told her truths inside lies. His father was a hard man who built things through force. True. He'd spent most of his adult life doing things he wasn't proud of. True. He was trying to find out who he was when you stripped all of that away. True. In a way that would have astonished her if she'd known the actual shape of it. She never asked about money. Not once. She asked what he was reading, what music he listened to. She asked, out of nowhere, whether he believed in God. When he said he believed in consequences, she was quiet for a moment and then said, that might be the same thing. He was falling for her. He knew it the way you know a storm is coming. The pressure change. The shift in the air. The knowledge that something irreversible is about to happen and there is nothing you can do to stop it. She was falling too, though she would have denied it. She would have said she didn't have time. She would have said she'd learned not to invest in things not built to last. But her face gave her away every time he appeared at the bar, and the way she said his name, Dax, held a softness she reserved for nothing else. Then he saw what she was actually carrying. Marcus Webb was the general manager. Good clothes, the particular brand of charm that requires constant feeding. He moved through the Ember room with proprietary ease. He complimented the female staff in a way that made the compliments feel like debt. He assigned Amara the best sections because she generated the best revenue, then implied regularly that her success was something he had given her rather than something she had built. Jackson watched this for 3 weeks before he understood the full shape of it. He understood it the night Amara clocked out at midnight and sat at the end of the bar with the quiet devastation of someone who has been fighting a battle no one can see. He's been skimming my tips, she said. Asterisk, not all of them. Enough to never be provable. He adjusts the POS records after close. I've tracked it 6 weeks. I'm down $400 on paper I know I made. Asterisk, have you told anyone? Who would I tell? Flat. Already run the calculation. Asterisk, he owns the room. The owner lives in Miami. If I push, I lose the job, lose the reference, and I'm a 31-year-old black woman in Harlem telling people a charming manager with 15 years in the industry is stealing from me. Asterisk, she looked at her hands. Asterisk, I have 4 months of savings left before I can afford the commercial kitchen license. I cannot lose this job. Asterisk, she paused. He also makes it clear that things could be easier for me if I was more. She chose the word carefully. Accessible. The heat in Jackson's chest was something he had to physically manage. The old him would have made one phone call, and Marcus Webb would never work again. Dax Monroe had no such leverage. Dax Monroe could only sit at a bar and watch. He shouldn't be able to do this, Jackson said. Something in the stillness of his voice made her glance at him sideways. People talk to me like that all the time, Dax. That doesn't make it right, no, she said. But it makes it Tuesday. She picked up her bag and walked out into the Harlem night alone. And Jackson sat at that bar and understood, with complete clarity, that the experiment was over. He had found what he came looking for weeks ago, in a jar of hot honey, in a $4 paperback, in a conversation about God and consequences. What remained was what he was going to do about it. The crisis came on a Friday. A large corporate table had complained about an overcooked entree. Marcus handled it the way he handled everything,
This
by
city
finding
is
someone else to
ours.
absorb the damage. He came onto the
Everything
floor,
we see.
smiled at the table, and with the volume of a man who knew he was performing said, "I sincerely apologize. Your server should have caught this before it reached the table." He turned and looked directly at Amara. "Amara, would you like to explain to these guests why their experience has been below standard?" The room went quieter than it should. Amara stood with her order pad. The stillness again practiced impenetrable, but Jackson was close enough to see the jaw held fractionally too tight. The single slow breath. "The kitchen confirmed the ticket went in correctly," she said. "The issue was in prep." "That's not what I asked," Marcus said pleasantly. And Jackson stood up. He walked across the dining room. Marcus turned and looked at Dax Monroe, the flannel, the boots, the Timex, with the narrowing of a man deciding whether this was worth his time. "Sir, this is a staff matter." "I've been watching you manage the staff for 6 weeks," Jackson said quietly. The room went entirely silent. "And I'm telling you once, speak to her like that again in public, and I will make sure every person in this room knows exactly what kind of manager you are when the tables aren't listening." Marcus looked at him. Whatever signal fired in the part of the brain that makes animals
Welcome everyone
go still
to
made
the
him
launch
say
night.
nothing.
Cheers,
Jackson walked back to
Thank
his
you.
stool.
We're so excited
That
for you to
night,
taste everything.
After the room cleared,
We can't wait.
Amara stood across the bar with her arms crossed. "Who are you?" He met her eyes. "Dax, don't clean." Final. The man I just watched turn a room around with 8 words does not wash dishes for a living. "Tell me the truth right now, or don't come back." So he told her. He told her clumsily and completely. His name was Jackson Harrove. The empire. The money. The violence held at arm's length. Yara and the recording device and the dead certainty that had calcified in him that no one would ever see him clearly without money distorting the view. The experiment. The fake identity. The 3 months of thrift store clothes and bus schedules that had been, until the moment he walked into her section, purely investigative. He told her he wasn't sure when it stopped being an experiment. Somewhere around the hot honey. Somewhere around her telling him consequences, and God might be the same thing. He told her he was sorry. When he finished, Amara was very still.
"You tested me," she said.
"Yes, you built a fake life and sat in my section and made me feel seen by someone who is seeing me through a one-way glass." Her voice did not crack but threatened to. "Do you understand what you took? I am very careful about who I let in. I have to be. I spent my entire adult life learning to read rooms and protect myself from exactly this. Men who present something false to take something real. And I sat here for weeks thinking I had finally met someone who wasn't performing. And you were performing the whole time. You just had a better costume than the rest. What I felt was real. What you felt is yours. Quiet. Like a door closing. What you took from me, my real conversations, the things I told you about my mother, about Calloway's table, you took those under false pretenses. And the fact that you've decided I passed your test doesn't make that okay. It makes it worse. Because now I'm the woman who didn't see through it." She picked up her bag.
"Don't come back," she said.
Not as Dax. Not as Jackson Harrove. Not as anyone. And she left. He did not call her. The impulse was constant for the first 2 weeks, a pressure in his sternum that rose toward his phone every time he was still enough to feel it. But she had asked him not to come back, and honoring that was the only honest thing he had left to give her. He went home. The real home. 63 floors above Midtown, marble floors, Central Park spread to the north like something designed to remind people of the distance between what they have and what they deserve. He stood in his living room and felt nothing. Less than nothing. The art on the walls, the recessed lighting. All of it looked like a movie set. A very expensive way to be alone. He called Pierce. I need something handled. Legally. Completely above board. Pierce ran a full background on Marcus Webb. What came back was complete. Tip skimming across 3 years of POS records. 2 sexual harassment complaints filed with the state, both settled under NDAs that a labor attorney named Clementine Vasquez described as legally questionable. When Vasquez reached both women through proper channels, they agreed to talk. The story ran in the Amsterdam News on Sunday. By Tuesday, Marcus Webb was suspended. By the following Monday, terminated. Jackson didn't stop there. He had Pierce establish a small business development trust, clean, nonprofit, no connection to Harrove Holdings. The trust funded early-stage food entrepreneurs, with a priority on women of color. The first recipient, 3 weeks after opening, was a catering company called Calloway's Table. She called the law firm 3 times, asking where the funding came from. The attorney said the donor wished to remain anonymous. She hung up, and Jackson sat in his penthouse and allowed himself exactly 1 moment of imagining her face when she understood. Then he went to therapy. The therapist in Montclair, when he described the full scope of what he had done, looked at him and said, "That's several years of work right there." "I know," he said. "Let's start." 3 months later, Calloway's Table launched. A converted warehouse in East Harlem. Exposed brick, warm light. Tables set like someone understood what hospitality was supposed to mean. The launch was a public event. He stood in line on a Tuesday evening in late spring and paid his own admission at the door. The food was extraordinary. Short rib, heirloom cornbread. The kind of cooking that requires not just skill but memory. Flavors assembled with the specificity of someone who has been carrying them their whole life. He stood at a high-top table and understood, eating it, that what Amara had been building through double shifts and rejected grants and a manager who stole from her was exactly this. Something real, made from the ground up, that owed nothing to anyone. He was on his second plate when she saw him. She came out of the kitchen, clipboard in hand, talking to a staff member, and turned, and their eyes met across the crowded room. She stopped mid-sentence. The staff member said something. She held up 1 finger. They looked at each other across the room of people eating her food. The room she had built. He expected her to look away. He expected the closed door. What he got was something he would spend a long time trying to name accurately. She looked at him. Fully. Steadily. The way she had looked at him on that first Tuesday night, running the assessment, deciding whether he was safe. The careful intelligence of a woman who has been reading people long enough to rarely be surprised. And she nodded. 1 nod. Small. Deliberate. Not forgiveness. Not an open door. Something honest. I see you. I know what you did, and what was false, and what wasn't. I know you fixed what you broke without requiring me to thank you for it. He nodded back. She turned and went back to the kitchen. He set down his plate. Left $100 cash on the table. Not as Jackson Harrove, not as Dax Monroe, just as a man who had eaten exceptional food and knew what it was worth. He walked out into the spring night and stood on the sidewalk for a long time. He did not have her. Had not earned her. Some debts don't get paid with grand gestures or anonymous trusts or a man in clean jeans standing in a doorway trying to look like he hasn't been waiting. But she was building something real. In a room she owned. Feeding people her grandmother's recipes with her mother's precision and no one's permission but her own. And somewhere in the last 3 months, the therapist, the early mornings sitting with the weight of what he'd done, and what it had cost, the slow, painful work of becoming a man who told the truth, Jackson Harrove had begun to understand that he'd started this experiment asking the wrong question. He had set out to find out if anyone could love him without his money. What he had actually needed to find out was whether he could become a man worth loving regardless of it. He was still working on the answer. But a woman who had every reason to close the door had looked across a crowded room and decided that was enough to acknowledge. He walked home under the spring sky. For the first time in years, the walk felt like it was going somewhere. This is what it costs to love something real. Not the empire deployed in someone's name, not the anonymous trust or the clean gesture. A lie told for the wrong reasons. A truth told too late. A nod across a room that means, I see the damage, and I see what grew through it anyway. Some things don't end. Some things just become the person you're still building yourself toward. Asterisk.